A senior Microsoft executive discovered that it's not malware that's been disabling Windows Update on Microsoft PCs, the ones that they have inside the company. Samsung's been doing it. Paul Thurrott co-hosts TWiT's Windows Weekly, Wednesdays at 11 a.m. Pacific. That's right after this show today. And writes about technology at Thurrott.com. Welcome to you, Paul.
Good morning, or good afternoon, I guess.
It's a little of that, depending on where you are across our great nation. Now, why has Samsung been disabling Windows Update, for crying out loud?
This is actually kind of an interesting issue because this is something that all PC makers run into, is in that they get their PCs out into the world. Hopefully they're set up and configured correctly with the right drivers and so forth. And then drivers come through Windows Update. And sometimes those drivers are generic drivers, generic chipset drivers, like Intel chipset drivers, graphics drivers, whatever. And that creates a non-optimal state for the PC because in some cases those drivers that were put on the PC originally were very carefully selected and curated because they were compatible with each other and worked well with each other, even if they weren't necessarily the latest version. And so I guess Samsung was trying to override that behavior and prevent Windows Update from, in its eyes, making the computer less stable.
Hey, Paul, is it just Samsung that's doing this right now? Because obviously all the other hardware partners have agreements with Microsoft and want the right drivers on their hardware as well.
I think that Samsung is the only one that is literally disabling Windows Update, which is a fairly radical step. I mean, obviously, most PC makers have some utility. I know I have a lot of Lenovo devices. They have this. I have a Samsung that has this SW Update app. HP and Dell presumably have their own special applications for this kind of thing. But taking that step of actually disabling Windows Update is malicious. I mean, it's a crazy act. And by the way, I'd say more so since I talked to Gabe All from the Windows team back in March, I think it was, or May, and he was telling me that they have a system set up for PC makers where they can join in and make sure that the drivers that are delivered through Windows Update are in fact curated for that specific device, that they will not receive generic drivers, and Samsung apparently has not signed up for that.
Apparently, according to your article, there is a disable_windowsupdate.exe. What happens when you just uninstall that?
Yeah, and to be clear, we should say this was discovered by a Microsoft MVP, an expert of some type, Patrick Barker, who I do not know. And the way he describes this, because he looked into this, he contacted Samsung support, and he kind of did all the legwork. So I want to make sure we give credit to him for this. But basically, you can disable it. You can uninstall it. Windows Update will spring back to life, but when you reboot the computer, things go back to the way they were before, which is part of that malware-related activity that I was talking about. It's a real, it's a little bit like the Snapfish incident with Lenovo, where the methods they use to make this work are identical to the way that malware works in Windows.
It seems like a pretty nuclear option, and one that Samsung is arbitrarily choosing to do. Paul, I'm not familiar with all the details of the hardware licensing or software licensing agreements Microsoft has with its partners, but I got to believe that this has to be in some way, shape, or form against that licensing agreement. Can Microsoft do anything about this? Do you think they will?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it would behoove Microsoft to publicly condemn, Samsung and make a big stink about this. I mean, I think this is something they would work with Samsung behind the scenes to make sure that this doesn't happen anymore, which is how I sort of expect this to all roll out. But it's funny, I haven't had a chance to examine my own Samsung Ultrabook to see if this is happening. I do use this tool, but I've never noticed this particular behavior, and I've heard from people who haven't seen it. So it's not universal, and it's unclear when it happens or why it happens. If there are specific machines, maybe it happens on. But we do know that for Windows 10, at least, Microsoft is changing the way that Windows updates itself and is requiring users, particularly those who agree to get the free version over the first year, allow that system to be updated through Windows Update. And so I sort of wonder if that's not semi-related, that they understand this relationship they have with PC makers over updating and so forth, and whether they're not trying to maybe change the tenor and the language of those agreements.